Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on with our journey, our discussion, our exploration with respect to the recent box set release, which was made by the Criterion Collection earlier this year. And that set is right here. World of Wong Kar Wai. And today I'd like to focus our attention, if I may, on a particular film which is included in this particular set. And such film is from 1997. It is another extraordinary, dynamic, powerful work from filmmaker and artist Wong Kar Wai. And it is called, and once again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation,春光乍洩, or in English, Happy Together. This is the extraordinary work from 1997 from filmmaker and artist Wong Kar Wai, and it stars Leslie Chung Kwok-wing and Tony Leung Chiu-wai and Chang Chen. This is the film春光乍洩, or in English, Happy Together. I think we could describe the plot or story of this film, Happy Together, as focusing in on this particular set of characters played by Leslie Chung and Tony Leung, Ho and Fai. And we see them, they are traveling together due to certain circumstances regarding which we get little clues or hints about along the way, along the experience of watching this film. But we see, or we get glimpses, or we get indications of them traveling from Hong Kong together to Argentina and to various spots in Argentina. And they are also together, they are a couple, and we see that there is a very strong emotional relationship, a very strong bond between them. And their relationship is expressed in various states and stages throughout the course of this film. Sometimes we see them together and in a very strong and emotionally happy state of being and state of mind, both in terms of emotional expression, also physical expression and sexual expression. And there are also other instances in the film where we see their relationship quite fractured, and they are drifting apart, and they are breaking up or have broken up as a couple. And to add to that, or as in parallel to that particular situation, we also understand that they are, due to certain circumstances, they are in essence stranded in Argentina without the money to be able to go home. And so they are, in their own ways, trying to save up money and make a living in the hopes of eventually going home or doing whatever it is they want with their lives at that particular point in time. And again, we are dealing with a film that is released in 1997, and that is very culturally and socially and historically significant in the context of the various themes and concerns that this film is dealing with, and I'll get to that somewhat later in the video. But in terms of the plot or story, that is what we have, or that is one component of this particular film. So we have, therefore, I think, in that very brief plot synopsis, I think we have the emergings, or the essential indications, if you will, of at least two very important fundamental themes of this particular film, and they're also, by extension, to representations of the concerns that Wong Kar Wai seems to have as a filmmaker throughout most of his, not his entire filmography. And those concerns, or those themes embodied in this particular story, Happy Together, are one, the state of isolation that the characters find themselves in on an emotional and intimate level, on the one hand, and then also the state of isolation that the characters find themselves in a physical or environmental or geographical context on the other. So they are isolated on an emotional level in terms of their relationship and the fractured relationship. And they are also isolated in terms of essentially not being able to go back to Hong Kong due to not having enough money to get the plane fare home, etc. And so this becomes a sort of a parallel or dual thematic structure or construct that it also informs many other parts of the film in terms of an intimate setting and also a macro level setting involving society and culture and history and cultural identity. So first off, in terms of the intimate level of this particular situation, as I say, it is arguable, or one can assert, I think, that this film is dealing in one way or another with not just the state of our relationships, not only the examination of the very intense relationship between these two characters, Ho and Fai, played by Leslie Cheung and Tony Leung. Of course, we get that, and we get it in a very direct and honest and very powerful depiction by all the filmmakers and actors involved. And it's a very involved one, and it has a very profound emotional impact on the viewer in terms of how we see these characters relate to each other and how we see the other character and that person's effect on the person. Whether that means some kind of expression of connection and a unity, or whether it means some kind of frustration or the inability to understand the other, thus causing yet further rift between the two, leading to what will eventually turn out to be the outcome of the film. But so in these terms, of course, we have, therefore, the expression of characters in states of isolation. But as we know with any film by this great artist, Wong Kar Wai, it is not always just in terms of one state of being. There are a multitude, there are many different states that are being expressed almost simultaneously. It's not just isolation, although that's a very strong component, I would argue. It is also perhaps, it could perhaps be said that this is a film that is dealing with characters that are found in states of emotional isolation or alienation, but that are in their own ways trying to break free from such states of isolation, or trying to resist such states of isolation, or, put it another way, to transcend or to otherwise transform their states of isolation into states of companionship or togetherness or union. And we see expressions of this by each of the characters in his own way. So, for example, we see how the Leslie Cheung character, how he tries to find connections with certain people that he meets, not just the Tony Leung character, but other people in Argentina, and whether those connections lead to anything that is substantial and emotionally healthy or not. That is something that we shall see as the film proceeds along its way towards its conclusion. And we also see how he tries to connect with the Tony Leung character, even where they might be in a state of, say, emotional or a relationship disarray. There is this adage, or there is this type of philosophical approach to life, as it were, the ability or the desire or need or want to essentially start over. Is it possible to start over again? Start from scratch, start anew, even though we might have a lot of emotional baggage that you and I might not be able to forget immediately. Is it still possible to start over? And that, I think, is a very profound statement or expression of the need or desire to break free from, as I say, this state of isolation that character like Ho, like the Leslie Cheung character, is and as he's expressed. So that's one situation, and whether or not he is successful in that type of attempt or endeavor at transforming his state of isolation, again, that really depends on the nature of his story arc and the characters involved. Speaking of characters involved, another character, of course, is Tony Leung's character. This is Fai, and so we see him also in various stages of this relationship breakup with the Leslie Cheung character, and how that affects him quite visibly and quite emotionally and to his core in a lot of ways. And so this is also a character where he's experiencing the state of emotional isolation and alienation, and yet he is still, throughout certain points of the film, seen to be trying or endeavoring to break free of this particular state of emotional alienation, in a sense, trying to transform this particular state into something that is akin to making connections with other people. And we see this, as I say, for example, in his attempts at trying to rebond or reconnect with the Leslie Cheung character. Also, we see the introduction of yet another character, the Chang Cheng character, and what he seems to represent and what he brings in terms of his relationship with the Tony Leung character. And this also is yet another possibility for connection, human connection, an emotional connection, an emotional bond. And yet we see other indications in the film where Tony Leung seems to be revealing to us in bits of information of voiceover narration and monologue, etc., about the circumstances as to why he is here and what brought him here, and maybe that has something to do with some kind of relationship issue that he has with his family, and specifically with his father. And so perhaps there will be moments where he will try to mend those broken bonds, as it were, and trying to reforge a connection in that direction as well. Whether or not he is successful, again, that is part of the progress of the film and its trajectory towards its conclusion. But in any event, these, I think, are yet other examples of how we see characters in states of isolation and indeed loneliness, and how they are trying, perhaps in their own ways, to break free from the state of isolation and loneliness. And whether or not they are successful in that endeavor or attempt, that's part of the plot or story trajectory going forward. So I think that's one level, a very powerful level, in which this film operates. And it's done, of course, in that impeccable and very poetic and very classy and very dynamic way that Wong Kar Wai brings to the table in terms of his cinematic style and his concerns. And we see those moments, those Wong Kar Wai moments, where he uses space and time and atmosphere in music in order to express in these visual and cinematic terms these modes or these endeavors or attempts by these characters to, in essence, forge or reforge or mend broken bonds, make or remake those human connections. For example, case in point, there's a lovely scene involving the Leslie Cheung character and the Tony Leung character, and they are in a state of breakup on the one hand, but certain plot developments occur that bring them together. And while there might be some resistance in terms of them basically becoming a couple yet again, while there might be some resistance to that, there's still an emotional attraction that is very evident, and it becomes it achieves a type of expression, not necessarily in words, but in a very a magical and powerful scene involving a tango dance. And so this is, I think, another example of where Wong Kar Wai uses music and art and dance and poetry in a way that seems to suggest that through these modes of human endeavor, human beings can express things and express the depths of their emotions in a way that perhaps they are otherwise unable to because of certain inhibitions or the like. And so this is, I think, a very profound statement of the human condition, and it's done in that oh so beautiful way that Wong Kar Wai in his cinema often does, always does, my friends. And so that is, I think, a great way in which director Wong Kar Wai is exploring this particular theme, this particular state of isolation and alienation in an emotional and intimate setting, while still portraying it with the verve and style that is part of his great cinematic outlook. But that's not all, I would suggest, because there's also another a level of isolation, namely that of the geographical, and in terms of their situation geographically. They are located right now, in terms of the film, in Argentina, and we understand that there are certain circumstances as to why they're there. Hints as to maybe they were traveling from Hong Kong to there, something to do with money being spent, probably by the Leslie Cheung character. There are attempts at trying to save enough money. They are working jobs, like a bouncer job in terms of the Tony Leung character, and then other times he's working as a chef or a cook in a restaurant kitchen. And so these are attempts by these characters to essentially save up enough money to be able to maybe go back home, or perhaps in the case of Tony Leung, the character played by Tony Leung, maybe there is another motive as to why he wants to save up this money. And so in any event, they are in this particular situation geographically. Now, this also is, or can be described as being, a state of isolation in the geographic sense, because they are, in essence, one way to put it is they are displaced, they are stranded. They cannot go home. Sometimes we see the characters think of home. Sometimes we see the characters wanting their passport back, the passport being that symbol of a type of cultural identity linking them to Hong Kong. Of course, they are linked to Hong Kong on the one hand, but they are outside of Hong Kong on the other. And so what does this mean in terms of their sense of self, and also their sense of, say, a type of cultural identity and an anchoring in some kind of understanding of who they are, especially when their surroundings, their external surroundings, might be completely different from where they are coming from, and so different, in fact, that they are, in fact, on opposite ends of the world. So Argentina and Hong Kong, and so this becomes, I think, a very another expression of the state of isolation, or being stranded in a geographical sense. And I think oftentimes the word that's employed or used to describe this particular situation in the context of Happy Together, this film, is the diaspora. And so this is a very integral part for a number of reasons, I think, within the context of this exploration of isolation and alienation in a geographical sense. So first of all, this is, I think, linked in very much with the emotional and intimate adventure, or sense of adventure that these main characters have or seem to have. I mean, they want to visit certain tourist spots, Iguazu Falls, etc., or to go to Ushuaia and other places like that where there is a tourist industry of sorts. And so this, I think, is suggestive of the adventurous spirit that is inherent in traveling and going abroad and going to a place in another part of the world that is outside of where you are from or where you are living. And I think that already brings with it an inherent sense of contradiction that's applied very beautifully in this film. And that contradiction is, on the one hand, when one travels and when one goes to a new place where one doesn't know anyone and one is visiting for the first time, there is a sense of adventure and freedom that is inherent in that. So much so that it brings the possibility of, say, meeting new people, getting into new situations, encountering new circumstances and the like. And in those encounters and in those meetings, one has the possibility of, say, expressing oneself in a way that one wants. There's a type of freedom or liberty, in a manner of speaking, where one is free to express who it is they are, how it is they feel, both maybe in an emotional way or in terms of character traits or in terms of, say, physical attraction or in terms of one's sexuality, etc. One can express oneself in a certain way because there's a sense of freedom of being in a place where you haven't been before. And so that is, I think, one aspect of the geographical traveling nature of this. And also, in that same vein, but on the opposite side of the coin, is the aspect of fear and angst and confusion and uncertainty, because also inherent in the idea of traveling to a place that one has never been is the idea that there are many unknowns. And when you go to a place that there are many unknowns, then there can be a sense of anxiety that is accompanying that, and worry, and maybe that worry leads to regret, or regret leads to a type of yearning, a sort of inexorable type of yearning to ultimately want to go back home, a type of homesickness that is maybe a metaphor for some kind of deep-rooted sense of feeling displaced or feeling uncertain or feeling unaware of certain things. And so already in this theme or conceit of traveling or going to a new country or a different country or going to a place where one is a visitor in a certain manner of speaking, there is already this inherent sense of contradiction, which I think is a very lovely complement to the emotional trajectories and terrains of these various characters and their own states of isolation, both, as I say, emotionally and then in this geographical sense. And even in this geographical sense, just like in their emotional isolated states, there are these there's the push and the pull. There is the ability, or there is the hope or aspiration or endeavor to try to break free from that. And I think that is also inherent on this geographical, metaphorical level as well. But also related to the geography or the space or the environment is the idea of the subjective experience that we have with these particular characters. And that subjective experience is also linked very closely, I would suggest, with their own emotional journeys throughout this film. And I'm speaking specifically of the main characters, the Leslie Cheung character, Tony Leung character, and the Cheng Cheng character. And so what do I mean by this? So also inherent in the idea of the geographical adventure exploration and that these characters in certain degrees are experiencing throughout the course of this film, also inherent in that type of exploration or journey is the notion or concept of one's perspective as one is in these various environments or geographical locations. And sometimes what that means is when one is traveling, there could be this way of looking at the world or way of looking at the particular situation where it is a wholly subjective one. There's this interesting effect, I think, of travel and how it somehow seems to magnify or intensify one's own subjective experience, such that one feels like the center of one's story and one's journey as one is embarking on this particular voyage or journey to another place on the other side of the world, you know. So there's a sense of one feeling like one is the center the main character of the story that is being told as one is embarking on his journey, on his or her journey throughout the course of the travels around the world. And so that's a wholly subjective experience of feeling like one's feelings or one's emotions are at the sort of the centerpiece of one's existence. I think that's very natural and a very reasonable type of experience to have, especially in the context of a geographical travel or voyage. So the wholly subjective experience of the journey or the voyage on the one hand, but also inherent in the same type of journey or voyage is also the realization or epiphany that one is, perhaps in terms of one's own existence, more minimalized than one might have originally thought. In other words, when one goes to a new place, a new location, these grand locales like Guizhou Falls or something, where the majesty and the grandness of the world and the universe, as well as the many people that one meets, reminds us of maybe our place in the world and the universe. And perhaps that place is not as central as one might have otherwise perceived it to be from the wholly subjective viewpoint. In other words, one has the potential of seeing the world wholly through the subjective viewpoint where one is central, or simultaneously at the same time, one has the realization or the epiphany that one is indeed making up just only a small fraction of the overall experience of the universe. And so that inherent juxtaposition and inherent contradiction is, I think, a part of the discussion or the thematic concern when we're dealing with these characters and their place geographically. I mean, for example, there are moments in this film that reference grand spectacle sites, tourist sites in this part of the world, such as Ushuaia or Guizhou Falls. And so this becomes, I think, a reminder of not only the wholly subjective experience of characters like Tony Leung or Chang Chen and how they are trying to express the depths of their turmoil and sadness and angst. There's that really poignant exchange, for example, between Chang Chen and Tony Leung and a tape recorder, and how this becomes very significant as a means by which we, as viewers, experience the ultimate expression of Tony Leung's character and his feelings as he experiences them at the moment. And how this becomes an example of that wholly subjective experience on the one hand, in the context of this geographical location voyage. At the same time, when we see the characters in these particular sites and their engagement with the environment and the water and the space around them, perhaps there is also that implicit reminder about the fact that they are one of many people who are existing in the world at once. And so maybe their stories, alongside the stories of many other human beings on this earth, maybe, what's the phrase? Maybe it doesn't amount to a hill of beans in the grand scheme of things. And so there's this idea of the realization of the minimal state, relatively speaking, to the rest of the world and the universe on the one hand, but yet at the same time there is that feeling or desire or yearning to want to express something in a wholly subjective way from the depths of one's soul, again, set against the backdrop of these grand geographical locales and locations. And so the use of geography in this way is, I think, both majestic and also intimate and very poignant at the same time. And we will see this also, I think, explored in another very fascinating way in another film by Wong Kar Wai, which is called in English "In the Mood for Love." And so I look forward to that conversation when we can get to it. But returning now to Happy Together, now we have this geographical complexity that is built into this particular story of, say, a voyage or traveling or being stranded or being displaced in this particular place of the world. But also in the context of geography, there's the connection with the socio-political and historical significance of the year 1997 and Hong Kong, and the relationship between the United Kingdom and Hong Kong and mainland China. And so what of course is being referred to is the point in 1997 where you had the transfer of the sovereign control of the territory of Hong Kong from the United Kingdom over to China. And so this is often referred to as the handover, the 1997 handover. And so this is very significant. One of the most significant aspects of socio-political and history that is dealt with in many examples of Hong Kong cinema, especially in the works of Wong Kar Wai. And here in Happy Together, I think we get the metaphorical discussions or of the implications of this type of social and historical change, and also cultural change as well. And so we therefore see the idea played out in terms of the emotional stories between and among these characters who are, say, stranded or displaced. Again, the word often used is diaspora, but ultimately what that is referring to is, say, the characters from Tony Leung character or Leslie Chung character, for instance. They are from Hong Kong, but what does it mean to be from Hong Kong or to be traveling from Hong Kong with their passports, which is of course the official symbol of their cultural identity. But what does it mean to have this link of cultural identity to Hong Kong, especially in the context of the handover? So what does that mean both in terms of cultural identity context, but also on an emotional and sort of fundamental way, how that affects one's view of oneself in terms of, say, the stability of knowing that there is a home to go to on the one hand versus the uncertainty that is associated with the fact that there is a sovereign rule change, a very significant transfer change regarding the stability of that home. So what happens to stability in the context of that handover? Perhaps there is a whole world of uncertainty and anxiety that is associated with that. And there's a sense perhaps of the symbol or the metaphor of displacement being very apt when it comes to expressing that mode of anxiety on the part or as a result of this particular issue or event of the handover. And so I think this is very much part of the geographic design, or the design of the film relying on the elements of geography and geographically related displacement of character in order to remind us in these metaphorical terms about the significance and the very deep gravity that is associated, as I say, on a socio-political and historical level, that is associated with the handover at this particular time, 1997. And so this is, I think, very, very significant. And it also ultimately comes back in a full circle because everything is connected in a Wong Kar Wai film. And so we have things that are on, say, these broad socio-political levels that always affect people on an individual human level, and how that confusion, that anxiety, and that uncertainty is expressing themselves in the context of these particular story arcs and character arcs throughout the film is it's an indication of how wholly connected everything is in this world, and how everything is this dynamic, ever-changing, ever-evolving type of metaphor, series of metaphors that can sometimes seem to be congruent, or perhaps also at the same time seem to be contradictory vis-a-vis each other. But that's part of the beauty and poetry of the cinema of Wong Kar Wai, and Happy Together as well, because Happy Together is also, or could be described as being, a set or series of explorations that are like contradictions. There are so many contradictions in this film that is, I think, another way of expressing the state of emotional intensity and confusion, or to put it in another way, the state of the human condition in these particular circumstances or situations, as I say, both on a socio-political and historical level, on a geographical level, and also on an intimate human and emotional level. And this is always part of the landscape of Wong Kar Wai's cinema, and it's certainly the case, I would suggest, in this film, Happy Together. And in this wonderful construction of contradictions that are very much relatable and understandable on a human and sort of intuitive level, I think we also have the one more thing about the contradictions before I move on to my final comment. Another thing about the contradictions I forgot to mention was there's this way, I think, in a very thematically coherent manner, there's this way too that in these various levels of thematic concern, we have this issue of union and breakup, and the idea of joining or rejoining, or trying to mend bonds, or to build bridges towards the other. And that is, I think, expressed in terms of the characters and how they are, as I say, in states of isolation, but also in a contradictory way, in a beautifully human contradictory way. They are trying to break free from that state of isolation into a series, or endeavoring to establish these series of connections. So isolation versus connection on an intimate level, and also geographically being stranded, and the sense of adventure and being in a new place on the one hand, but also longing for home and yearning to go back home on the other. The sense of free spirit and free expression, both spiritually, emotionally, in terms of one's sexuality, etc., on the one hand, but then also feeling a sense of isolation and uncertainty in the state of travel and voyage on the other. And then also the idea of the joining or union, or the handover in the context of the 1997 handover, the breakup between the territory and one sovereign power on the one hand, and then the forging of the new bond with the new controlling sovereign power on the other. And so this is a breakup and also a union. But is the union truly a union, or is it an uneasy one? And so this is, I think, again, a very inherent sort of a structured contradiction that is paralleled or mirrored in various parts of the film. So that's what I mean when I say this film is like a series or collection of structured contradictions applied in a beautiful and poetic and mesmerizing way. And leading from that, we have some closing comments on the film, which can be focusing in on Wong Kar Wai's style and the way in which he achieves, in cinematic terms, on his own terms as an artist, this depiction of these structured contradictions. And this is done through, say, a use of, say, black and white cinematography for certain scenes, and then color cinematography for other scenes. And there might be a certain philosophical choice behind the use of black and white versus the use of color. Sometimes there is the use of a slow motion framing versus a sped up sense of time. And also Wong Kar Wai, in his exploration of these contradictions, also utilizes his outtake and perspective on time and space, or the space-time continuum in the context of human relationships, in that oh so beautiful Wong Kar Wai fashion. And so we see here, for example, contemplations on time and space. For example, the way in which we as human beings seem to perceive or understand or otherwise engage with certain places or environments or buildings or cities or places that could be either very close to us in proximity or perhaps so far away as to be on the complete opposite side of the world, and how we relate to that and how we view that and how we remember places. Do we remember just the place, or do we have fond memories of places because we also recall the people who once occupied those places, who once walked the streets of those places, or who lived in the buildings of those places, but now no longer do? So there is a sense of a past that once was but is no longer there. So it's a sense of some kind of lost past, or some kind of place that is outside of us and we cannot access, but we can always think about and always remember. And something very powerful and very palpable about that type of engagement, which is also, in a very interesting way, another expression of the wholly subjective experience that I was referring to earlier. And so, and we also see the effects of time. Time seems to be stretched out, or time seems to be very much compacted and sped up in a way. And this is expressed in bits of dialogue, and how the idea of, say, time seems to be going by quickly, or there are certain cuts of edits that are suggestive of big jumps in time, or there's a way in which the cinema shows us in visual terms how time is sped up and stretched out, or it's slowed down, and sometimes even a moment is frozen, even if but for a split second, in order to emphasize something of the truly spectacular and emotionally powerful captured in a split second of time. And so this is, I think, yet another example of, say, the ways in which characters are trying to break free from their states of isolation, as expressed in, say, the split second freeze frames that we get here and there throughout this film, Happy Together. And so and also one final thing about the way in which Wong Kar Wai expresses or examines the ways in which human beings express their emotions. This is also a very inherent paradox as seen in this film Happy Together, but also perhaps generally in the filmography of Wong Kar Wai overall. Now, what I'm suggesting, or what I'm talking about, is in this film, Happy Together, there is this really profound way that we see the characters express their emotions. And case in point, the Tony Leung character, he is a character that we see going through a lot. There's a lot that he is going through in terms of his relationship, the fractured one that he has with the Leslie Cheung character. And it's very, I think, evident that Tony Leung's character has this very strong emotional yearning or desire to be with him, but there is also this wall, this inability to understand, and that inability leads to a further fracturing or breakup, which leads to further angst and sadness and turmoil and confusion. And so this becomes distilled in a really powerful expression of this emotion. And I refer to the Chang Chen character and the tape recorder, and the way in which this is used to show, in essence, a type of really powerful and fundamental human emotion being expressed, that is crying, to express so many things, so many complex emotions in this act of crying. Now, this is very significant too, because what this seems to be saying too, in an implicit way, is there is this interesting way in this film where characters obviously of course, are seen interacting with each other. And that's the essence of drama, how human beings interact with each other and respond to those interactions and what results therefrom. That is the nature of human drama, right? And that is, of course, the drama that is at the heart of Happy Together. So interaction with others is very key, but also in another beautiful contradiction, perhaps, there's a way that characters or human beings express their emotions so purely when they are alone. In other words, the only time that, or sometimes we see characters being able to express the very depths of their emotional states when they are by themselves and not with anyone else. So this is, for example, Tony Leung and the tape recorder. And so we have this ultimate expression of the depths of his emotional state of being, expressed in a way where he is otherwise isolated. So this is yet another, I think, profoundly beautiful and very poetic contradiction yet again, which is the idea that we are able to know ourselves the most and express the truest forms of ourselves the most when we are alone and isolated, which is, I think, such a profound statement of the human condition. I wouldn't call it a negative statement, far from it. I think there is a very powerful statement that is very cleansing and very much cathartic that is related to this. And catharsis is one of the key modes of human existence, and the need to release the buildup that is in order to maintain a sense of composure and a sense of sort of emotional well-being, build up in catharsis. And this is the essence of sort of the emotional trajectory of many people, right? And so this idea of catharsis being expressed so wholly and so completely when one is alone. And so that is yet a further, I think, or furtherance of that maybe hypothesis or thesis that is being expressed by Wong Kar Wai in this film Happy Together. That is the state of isolation and what that means, and how characters are trying to break free from that, whether they are successful or not, and what that means in terms of their own emotional states of being. And perhaps ultimately, in these states of isolation, they are able, in one form or another, to truly and wholly express what it is they actually feel. This is the film Happy Together. And so the Criterion Collection has released these films in this box set, World of Wong Kar Wai, and included in such selection of films is, of course, the film Happy Together from 1997. And it is based upon these new 4K restorations. And here we have, therefore, this new presentation, this new restoration presentation of this film that is part of the Criterion Collection release. And there's also a supplement or set of supplements included in this particular disc. So first, let us focus in on this particular supplement or series of supplements, and then I'll speak a little bit about my reactions to this particular restoration presentation. The first supplement that is found with this disc is a very splendid documentary from 1999, and it is approximately an hour and 1 minute as it appears in the Criterion Collection supplement section, and it is called Buenos Aires 0 Degrees. This is actually a documentary that was also found on past physical media releases of this film, Happy Together. For example, I have this DVD here from Kino Video, and it was included as part of this particular release as well. And so we're getting that same hour-long documentary about this film, or the making of this film, or backstage footage or rehearsal footage regarding this film. And also we're getting some deleted scenes, some alternate takes, some characters that we actually never see in the final version of the film, but we get glimpses of, or we get little indications of story arcs that could have been, but we understand perhaps left on the proverbial cutting room floor, as it were. And so this documentary is really it's a documentary and so much more. It is, of course, an indication of the making of the film, the settings, the locations, going to Argentina, rehearsing, and trying to get at the emotional depths of the particular character performances, etc. And in that way, of course, it is splendid. There are some instances, for example, of the footage, or not footage, excuse me, but the rehearsals. And there's a particular moment where the actors are rehearsing a particular scene involving a tango dance. And here we get Wong Kar Wai, the director, working with the actors, and we see him without his trademark sunglasses. He's wearing regular glasses, not his sunglasses. So this is a very interesting glimpse into Wong Kar Wai and his non-sunglasses look as he is engaged very intensely in this rehearsal of this particular important moment. And so in that way, that's an example of, I think, how this particular documentary is so delightful and so informative to watch. But that's one component, because another component that makes this documentary so fascinating is it does, as I say, reveal or indicate other possibilities of other characters that could have been but ended up not being in the final product. But we still get indications of other characters, other scenes, deleted whole character arcs, and we can imagine where the film could have been, where it might have gone had these particular components been included. So this is, I think, another great example of a film or a documentary which is showing us the real depths of the world that was being built by Wong Kar Wai and company, and the manner in which they are the film was finally put together in the form that it was in, and so the way in which the film was being made, there is this idea of, or sense of how the real lives of the real lives of the filmmakers and actors tended to blur with the characters that they were playing or the situations that they found themselves in, and how the production tended to last a very long time and went way over than initially planned, the schedule initially planned, and things of this nature. And also visiting locations that were used for the filming, and now they are in, of course, different states, people living in the apartments that were used for the locations for this film. And so that's another, I think, a very subtle and clever way in which this documentary is showing us, again, the example of how place and geography, how they are employed in the world of Wong Kar Wai, and how we can look at a place or location and we can associate certain things with it about the past, about memory, and we have certain connections with it, even though these memories that we might have associated with a place are of things that no longer exist in the now, in the moment. And so I think we get that subtle, or perhaps not so, perhaps it's quite a direct presentation in these location visits, which is another great example of why this is such a great documentary. It has this dynamism. It almost feels like an extension, a sort of natural extension of the film in this organic way. So if you haven't seen it, please check it out. It's a really splendid one. It's credited as directors Kwan Pan Leung and Amos Lee. So please check it out if you can. Again, it's approximately an hour and a minute, approximately 1 hour. And then we have the trailer, which is also accompanying this particular supplement section. So in terms of the number of supplements, it's not many. It's quite low in quantity, but I do want to emphasize in particular this hour-long documentary is so worth it. And so please check it out. This is another great opportunity to check it out if you haven't had a chance to see it already in, say, past physical media releases. Now let me address the restoration itself, or my reaction and my engagement and my comments regarding my engagement with respect to this particular restoration, this new presentation of this film. Now, as I say, I've seen this film in the versions prior to this new restoration, this new Criterion release, etc. And so, for instance, I have this, as I mentioned, this older non-Criterion release, and there are differences. The differences, I would say, are, well, let's just generally what they are in terms of visual presentation. There is this sense of, say, the for example, in particular, the black and white photography. In the earlier presentation of this film, the black and white photography scenes in particular had a brightness. The bright lights were very hot and very bright indeed. Whereas in this new 4K restoration presentation that's included with Criterion set, those bright spots, those hot spots, seem to be somewhat diminished in intensity. So there's a little bit of a receding of the hot spot aspect that was found, say, in earlier non-restoration releases. And so there is that I think that diminishing, which I think helps to also create a sense of contrast between the shadow and the light sources. And so I think that actually works to the film's advantage, because there's a lot more contrast, and there's a lot more a delineation, I would say, in terms of the objects that are shown on screen. Not to say that there was any type of issue with any past versions of the film. On the contrary, I don't think those were in any way detrimental. But in terms of the visual contrast or the visual difference, I would say that's one of the key ones. Another key one in terms of visual differences, I could count one or two instances where, say, a scene that was black and white, a very short sequence that was black and white in the earlier release version, is now color in this new Criterion version. And so, but those are very subtle differences in my point of view, and so I don't think it affected my overall engagement with the film. And in fact, I would say perhaps that the choice of having a certain moment that used to be in black and white, to have this particular moment now in color, it's a very brief moment, and so, but it does, I think, have this way of emphasizing a type of philosophy that could be said to be employed in terms of the use of black and white versus the use of color. In other words, maybe the use of black and white might be suggestive of something of the past, something that was something of maybe happier times in the relationship between these two men, for example, whereas the color sequences are perhaps an indication of the now, of the moment, which is much more complex and much more fractured and much more distant, potentially anyway. And so maybe that use or the change from black and white to color is perhaps an indication of where that particular scene was in the contours of the relationship. But at the same time, I think it's also open to a variety of possible interpretations. In any event, there is that change, but it's not drastic. It's quite subtle, in fact, and it goes by quite quickly. So I don't think it affects in any detrimental or negative way one's engagement or enjoyment with the film. Also, those are visual terms. In terms of the soundtrack and the dialogue in particular, and specifically the voiceover narration moments of the Tony Leung character and also the Chang Cheng character, let's talk about the Tony Leung character for a moment. There are moments where his character provides voiceover narration, types of monologues throughout the film. Not everywhere, but in certain key areas of the film. Now, I understand that for purposes of this restoration, not all of those audio soundtrack source materials were available for purposes of the restoration. And so, assuming that that's true, then what that meant is, or in terms of the Tony Leung character's voiceover narration, bits of voiceover narration that we got in earlier release versions are no longer here in the new Criterion or new 4K digital restoration version. In other words, there might be instances where we had a long line of dialogue in the voiceover narration by his character, but now it's cut, or it's part of it is excised, or it's only an excerpt of it. Or sometimes we have a shortening of a particular sequence of voiceover narration lines, or perhaps there are chunks of voiceover dialogue that used to be present in certain scenes but now are just not present at all. It happens, for instance, in some of the sequences where we have interactions between Tony Leung and Chang Chen, and there's the voiceover narration by the Tony Leung character. And so in earlier release versions we did have some voiceover narration, but those portions are no longer there in this new version. So I guess it's something that perhaps when one is watching these films in isolation, maybe one doesn't notice. It maybe perhaps becomes noticeable, in particular if one is, say, watching them side by side or at the same time and seeing exactly where this earlier version has voiceover narration versus where this new version does not. And sometimes the effect of that is dialogue tends to be maybe rearranged or timed slightly differently. Not always, but just occasionally or every now and again. But as I say, I don't think it would affect one's overall engagement with those particular voiceover narration monologues. I think the essence of what is being said or what is attempted at being said is still retained in this new restoration release. But please note that there are those differences, and if you listen to them side by side, they are actually quite noticeable. So that's one aspect of the audio soundtrack. Also, very curiously, there's a sequence, or there are some moments where we have Chang Chen's character and his own voiceover narration monologue in certain key sequences towards the latter half of the film in particular. And to my ear, I noticed that, and I'm not sure if this is entirely true, but based on my amateur ear and my amateur hearing, it sounded to me like there was a moment where Chen Chen's voiceover narration is heard. In the earlier version, it seemed to have been a little bit more of a higher voice register and a little bit more optimistic in terms of its voice or monologue or dialogue delivery. Whereas in the Criterion version, it sounds like a different take of the same or similar dialogue. And here in the Criterion Collection, that take sounds a little bit more pensive, a little bit more almost brooding, versus the earlier versions, which sounds to my ear like it was a little bit more uplifting or optimistic. And so, assuming that my hunch is correct, then what this also means is that not for everything, but for certain parts of the Chang Chen voiceover narration, we have different takes of the dialogue delivery being employed for this new version versus earlier past versions. Now, ultimately, I don't think it affected my experience or my engagement with the film in a negative way. In fact, I think the brooding, more pensive delivery of the dialogue in those key sequences, I think serves the underlying effect of those sequences, especially if we look at them in the manner which might suggest a release or catharsis of this pent-up emotion that is very complex indeed. So I think that type of importance attached to an emotional release like that, I think, is well served with a type of pensive delivery of that type of dialogue. So not to say anything negative about the earlier version's presentation or a rendering of that dialogue itself, but there's, I think, something quite natural and organic when listening to it in that type of manner or that type of tone of voice, etc. So if my hunch is correct, then we are dealing with, in certain parts anyway, different takes of the same dialogue used for voiceover narration. But I think to the film's overall benefit and effect, as I was trying to suggest right now. So in these ways, my friends, we do have a presentation with different details, but overall I think those differences are subtle, and I think it won't affect the overall viewing experience that you might have when watching this film. And And I think, as I say, on visual terms, I think it does serve to enhance or support the drive or philosophy or perspective of this film in terms of the setup or the establishment in a complex net or network, the setup or establishment of emotional and geographical states of isolation, and the attempts or endeavors of all the characters involved to break free from that. And so I think this particular presentation seems to be quite consistent. Changes and all seems to be consistent with that viewpoint or approach to this film. And so I think this is a very sound and quite strong and reliable new restoration. And so I think of the restorations that we have seen thus far, this is perhaps one of those release versions or presentations that I had the least amount of resistance to when I first started watching this particular version. Let me put it that way. I did notice some differences, but as I say, I didn't feel a sense of resistance. So, and I actually felt almost immediately that there was a sense in which it didn't affect my overall viewing or viewing pleasure of the film. So that's my series of comments on the presentation and the release overall. The film is Happy Together, which is included here in this great set, World of Wong Kar Wai. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.